Hello and welcome to For the Future, our live conference and exhibition to showcase our collective work from over the last few years, as well as our dissertation videos. I'm Charlie Blamey, and I'll be talking about Viking representation in media, with focus on early Viking films and the popular game Skyrim.
I'm Daniela McGurk, and I will be talking about audience empowerment through social media, exploring topics including the social dilemma, documentary, and coronavirus misinformation.
Hello, I'm Henry Charlson, and I will be talking about playability in video games and how it can be improved.
And I'm William Smith, and I'll be talking about how effective video game storytelling is at capturing and maintaining the audience. Thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this live stream, and we hope you find it entertaining and educational, and we hope you have a good day. Thanks.
Show me those pretty white doors. Show me where the delicate stops. Show me what you've lost and why you're always taking it slow. Show me what wounds you've got. Show me love. Show me those.
Video games play a massive role in today's entertainment. Millions of people from all over the world enjoy video games. Games are renowned for many things, be it new and exciting gameplay mechanics such as games like Portal, maybe it's the exploration and navigation of virtual space such as games like No Man's Sky, the world design and the sights there are to see in the gaming world far removed from reality such as the Outer Worlds, or perhaps it's the expansive lore, the storytelling the game provides, the gut-wrenching, thought-provoking and downright amazing narratives that some games such as The Last of Us have mastered. But the question is video game storytelling effective? To understand video game storytelling, one must first understand the theories behind storytelling, and because of this video will be split into 3 parts. Part 1 will explore different storytelling theories, Part 2 will investigate storytelling within video games, and finally Part 3 will provide a conclusion and will answer the question, is video game storytelling effective? Storytelling has been a pillar in human history. From paintings on cave walls to Homer's Odyssey, from TV shows to film, storytelling plays and continues to play a huge part in humanity's everyday life. Storytelling provides entertainment and educates. While examples of entertainment are more common, educational examples include teachings about ethics, science, and the world around us. Truly anything can be told through narrative. As Rob Eisenbach states in his incredibly long book, that anything can be a story. He summarizes that stories are any sort of tale with a beginning, middle, and end. Or moreover, the beginning of an event, what happened, and finally a conclusion. For example, John went to the shop, he bought milk, and he came home. Even though it is very simple, it is a story. This 3-point theory can be applied to almost any story in existence. For example, in the film Die Hard, the character is John McClane, the goal is to rescue the hostages, and the challenge or obstacle is the terrorists that have taken over Nakatomi Plaza. Eisenbach goes on to explain that how the character tries to resolve the challenge is what drives the plot, keeping the audience engaged. This simple theory can be applied to any story. However, the basic form is only scratching the surface of what storytelling can be. When creating an expansive world complete with years of history and lore, it is hard to use these simple methods for story structure, and that is why most writers use the hero's journey. Most, if not all, epic expansive stories can be boiled down to 12 steps. The monomyth, a known theory long before it was popularized by Joseph Campbell in 1949 by his book The Hero with a Thousand Faces, where he explored the theory that all heroes from all tales, fables, and myths stem from the same basic structure summarized into 17 steps. Campbell inspired many writers with his book, including an author and story consultant, Christopher Vogler. Vogler wrote a book of his own called The Writer's Journey, but more importantly, he worked as a story consultant for Disney in the 1980s. While working at Disney, Vogler released a 7-page memo that would gather Campbell's ideas together and further synthesize them down into 12 simple steps. Starting the character in a status quo or ordinary world to introduce the audience to the world the character knows before the call to adventure takes us to the story. The rest of the steps, such as the crisis and the result, are used to structure the conflict of the story and the relevant reward for finishing that conflict. Half-Life, a game created by Valve, is renowned for being one of the greatest video games of all time, and being the game that taught developers how to tell stories through video games. Half-Life opens with the protagonist boarding a train and heading to work at the Black Mesa research facility. In the first sequence, the players are introduced to the world through context clues, such as scientists talking about what the facility does, who Black Mesa are, their goals, and what the public opinion on the group is. This is the perfect example of the status quo step. As Evan Stockhill says in his book Video Game Storytelling, it's the calm before the storm before all hell breaks loose. Half-Life is still seen today as one of the best video games with one of the best openers in video game history. It also still keeps that niche fan base, retaining an average player count of 500 a day, even after being 20 years old. The fact that Half-Life still has an active player base after so many years shows that creative gameplay coupled with story is effective. Keith Stewart, a reporter for The Guardian, theorizes that one of the biggest factors for the success of Half-Life is the immersive storytelling. The escapism in the video game is paramount. And Half-Life's You're Trapped Here 2 trope makes it clear that as a player you are involved. The player is the key factor to the survival of the character, which motivates the player to finish the story and see the outcome. To summarize, storytelling has many different theories and avenues for creation. Whether utilizing the 12-step monomyth like writer Dan Harmon, creator of Rick and Morty, or if one uses more simplistic methods like the discomfort method that Pixar uses often. The creation of a story can be linked to any theory. Many writers use multiple different theories, such as Evan Stockhill. O'Sullivan talks about video games in his article and states that all video games are inherently mixed media. He goes on to say that whereas most writers can build a world through words, video games have the unique ability to build it virtually and reinforce it with words and world building. O'Sullivan's views are shared with most of the community, which is why bigger games, known as AAA titles, have such huge fan bases, because they have a coupling of stories on top of great gameplay. Games such as Fallout by Bethesda, which takes place in a post-apocalyptic version of Earth, with the idea that the wasteland does not change people as such, but rather it's a framing device that allows the writer to force the survival aspect of human nature into the spotlight. Games such as the 2018 hit Red Dead Redemption by Rockstar, which introduces a character who views himself in the world with a cynical dual morality and justifies his actions as necessity to keep himself and those around him safe. Games like these are the ones that stand out and the ones that have the biggest sales. Red Dead Redemption 2 sold over 23 million copies as of 2019. That is a massive revenue gain of 1.25 billion. But overall success is not gauged by the number of copies or tickets sold. As earlier stated by Tom Morris, Star Wars has a huge fan base. However, the newest film released in 2019, Rise of Skywalker, sold 30% less tickets on opening day compared to the first film in the trilogy, Force Awakens, making 1 billion less worldwide. Yet Star Wars still has a massive audience, contrary to what is seen as a failure of the last film by many. This is because of the expansive world that the viewer can explore through other mediums, such as books, but more importantly, video games. Star Wars has been making video games since the 1982 Empire Strikes Back game for the Atari 2600. One notable Star Wars game is the Knights of the Old Republic, or KOTOR, released in 2003. KOTOR is considered one of the greatest RPGs of all time, and has an average player base of 900 a day according to Steam charts. Josie, a video game journalist, recently did a retrospective on KOTOR, sharing the belief that it still holds up to one of the best games ever made. As well as winning several awards, KOTOR sold over 1.3 million copies in its first week, becoming the third most successful game of that year, according to Top Lister. Gates, a video game journalist, states Star Wars used mixed media to push further story development. However, the games are mostly positively received, and some even prefer the games over the movies and narrative alone. Gates goes on to state that most fans think KOTOR is one of the best stories ever told in the Star Wars universe, and one of the best Star Wars adventures of all time. The narrative in KOTOR was effective. It is still renowned even 16 years later as still one of the best stories ever created. Most believe games should be judged on the basis of how well it achieves its goals rather than the sales. Hence why Skyrim still sells for £50 even though the game is over 10 years old, and has had different versions of the game released under different names, yet the newer releases don't fix any of the bugs or plot holes that the game is filled with. The goal of Skyrim is to give a feeling of exploration, with random encounters that give each player an almost unique experience, letting the player explore this 3D world unlike anything in the real world. A level of immersion and escapism that the game provides each player a sense of uniqueness. However, if the player experience needs to be unique, then why does linear storytelling games such as Uncharted, Red Dead Redemption, The Last of Us do so well? Well, less Red Dead Redemption. Now this is where the video would normally go down the rabbit hole of why Red Dead is a linear story game masquerading as an open world game, and how it fails to grasp either the open world style such as Fallout and Skyrim, and fails to go down the path of the linear story such as The Last of Us and Uncharted. The reason why this topic remains unearthed is because Red Dead succeeds at telling a story. Arthur, the playable character, has such an engaging story that the player stops caring about the game's downfalls, such as its failure to achieve the true open world element, and focuses their attention on the story. The player feels so invested in this character and his family that you forget about all the problems with the game. A downfall of storytelling in video games is a little thing called lure narrative dissonance. Lure narrative dissonance is the disconnect between what is happening in the cutscenes and what is happening in gameplay. For example, in the Uncharted series, there is no connection between gameplay Nathan Drake murdering hundreds of people and Nathan Drake in the cutscenes, who is basically a historian with experience in deep-sea salvage. Okay? This is also seen in films such as Indiana Jones, a historian who murders multiple people, but his murderous tendencies is never mentioned or talked about within the film. A good form of lure narrative dissonance is weirdly by the same company who created Uncharted, The Last of Us. The Last of Us is one of the best games ever made, considered by some as a masterpiece, the closest to a 10 out of 10 a game can get. The game has a lot of killing, but the game attempts to talk about it. Many characters within the game confront the protagonist Joel about the people he has killed. The game wants the player to speculate whether Joel is a good guy, or if he's just a selfish man who welcomes violence. The game does this by constantly showing Joel use violence to get ahead, and violence because it is the easiest course of action. Yet the narrative is about Joel and his relationship with a girl he has been tasked to escorting across America. The unanimous feeling shared by the community on The Last of Us is the relationship between Joel and Ellie, the ups and downs of the relationship, the characters that they interact with, the people the player meets in the game is what keeps the audience engaged. The journey, coupled with the game's creative and unique take on the zombie apocalypse, is what kept fans coming back. The repetitive puzzles and overall bland combat would make this game quite boring and making the replayability of the game undesirable. But the relationship between Joel, the selfish man who has finally opened up his heart since the death of his daughter and is ready to be a father again, and Ellie, the isolated youth who has never had an authority figure in her life, as everyone she has ever cared for has either died or abandoned her. This is what makes the game one of the best. To summarize, effective storytelling is not measured through sales, but rather consistent viewership or player base. As Golden states, tribes are about faith. It is the belief of an idea or concept that brings these communities together. So when the concept is an expansive world where each player has the potential to have a different experience, or perhaps a different interpretation of the overall story, this brings the community together to share thoughts, theories, and ideas and opinions of their experience with the game. Expansive worlds, exciting twists, and creative experiences all contribute to the effectiveness of a video game. Storytelling plays a huge role in creating these communities, be it a niche audience that continues to play no matter how many years have passed, or the massive fan bases that continue to grow. Understanding that narrative is one of the main aspects of effectiveness of a game, as this is what people talk about years after initial release. An example of this is the already mentioned KOTOR. KOTOR still has a massive player base with daily players that rival most modern games, with the story being the part that people remember most fondly, and that keeps players returning. Another example of this is the also previously mentioned Half-Life. Renowned as one of the best stories in video games, from both these examples one can begin to understand that storytelling through video games is effective at capturing and maintaining an audience. Being able to not only immerse the player through creative world design and gameplay, but to be able to emotionally invest the player with an impactful and thought-provoking narrative that will compel an audience for years to come. And hopefully, the future iterations of audiences will continue to ask more questions, as often art does not give us all the right answers, but it makes us ask the right questions. The social relevance of storytelling in video games is easy to see. These stories need to be told, and there's no better medium than an interactive, immersive experience, like video games. The means to inspire a generation or make a player ask questions about the narrative, such as the difference between good and bad. This research is only scratching the surface. The true effectiveness of storytelling in video games and the true overall importance storytelling within the medium of video games are still yet to be fully realized. The discussion continues. The great lengths one strain to hone one's own interpretation of a narrative, presented by a video game, searching for a true meaning behind it. Players often face the same question when they talk about video games, and to answer the question of why do you play video games, maybe instead one should ask, why don't you play video games?
Vikings. Who were they? Well, according to history, they were raiders, farmers, colonizers, and seafaring explorers. The first recorded encounter was in Lindisfarne Monastery in 793, when a group of Viking raiders pillaged the monks living there and stole as many riches as they could. Even though the raiders and pillagers only made up a relatively small percentage of the Viking population, this violent introduction paved the way for many stereotypes to be formed and later used and perpetuated in media. Of course, I can't make any claims without having any research and evidence to support them, so let's start off with something simple. I asked a group of 40 voluntary participants between the ages of 16 and 70 years old to fill out a questionnaire about what they knew about Vikings. And before we start, I should probably clear something up. Viking was more of an occupation than a group of people. The Viking people were actually a lot of different communities that vaguely shared the same pantheon of gods and came from Scandinavia. But not much else. They were more often referred to as Danes and Norsemen. Anyway, research. The questionnaire started off with a list of stereotypes, and I asked the participants to pick the ones they recognised, meaning whichever ones they had heard of in passing or thought to be true, as well as the option to tell me some other ones I maybe didn't list. Their responses were berserkers, which a third of the participants recognised, blood eagle, which is a rather disgusting method of killing, which 15.4% of participants recognised, horned helmet, with 74.4% making it the most recognised stereotype. The ever classic women had no rights, at another 15.4%. They were unified or unionized, which was recognised at 17.9%. That was a terrible pun. They're purely raiders and pirates by today's standards. It was picked by 48.7% of the participants. 28.2% of participants had heard that Vikings were extremely clean and vigorous with their hygiene, which they were, by the way. And 17.9% of participants had heard that Vikings were racially pure.
What does this prove?
For starters, it proves that stereotypes can spread even when there is little fact to back them. The whole horned helmets thing can't be proved, nor disproved though. But according to the National Museum of Denmark, only one Viking Age helmet has been preserved and it does not have horns. Why is this relevant? Well, it shows that the stereotype has been spread somehow. And if it isn't factually correct, then it is doubtful that it will be taught in schools, colleges or universities, which leaves the only option to be pop culture. And how does pop culture spread? Media. And that can be applied to everything I'm about to say to some extent. This can be seen in films such as How to Train Your Dragon and Vic the Viking and the Magic Sword. The participants that said Vikings were raiders and pirates shows that there is a stereotype of Vikings being as such, which originates from the pirates that would be known to raid civilians, much like the 17th century and modern day pirates are known to do. Though there are a lot fewer other civilizations travelling by boat, which meant they focused more on villages for ease and monasteries for their wealth. I asked the questions: which of these Norse afterlives have you heard of? What is the earliest record of Viking existence? And what gender were the Valkyries, to determine the general level of knowledge that the participants held about the Nordic beliefs and history in general. Here are some of the answers on screen now. My personal favourite was a fairly long multi-choice question. It was, which of these modern words comes from the Vikings? The options are listed on screen as such. All of these words have roots in Old Norse, which the Norsemen brought over with them. However, only 17.5% of the participants answered correctly. The most commonly picked answers were thrall and ransack, two words that hold generally violent and unpleasant connotations, while happy, cozy and anger were only guessed by 5% of people. Why does it matter? The incorrect answers show that education on Viking culture is spotty. which means that the majority of the general public's information is coming from media. And if a person doesn't know much about Vikings, then they're more likely to believe the stereotypes that the media shows them. The unknowing spreading of false information is always dangerous, no matter the context. People affected by this specifically are a religious group called the Asatru, who worship the same pantheon as the historic Norsemen. This stereotype that their religious ancestors were bloodthirsty, violent people has attracted a rather unsavoury group to their American counterparts, called heathens. Their view of heathenry can best be shown using the 1958 film The Vikings. In 1958, a film was released for the first time about the barbaric race of Northmen who pillaged and slaughtered their way through history. The aptly named The Vikings was the first piece of media that I could find that had the Vikings as characters, and I have to say, it wasn't a very flattering debut. I mean, check out this clip from the trailer.
To a Viking, there was no life except life in battle. There was no death except death in battle. There were no women except women taken in battle.
So what does this mean?
Well, first of all, there is very little historical evidence for anything the trailer man said, but that's besides the point. With this being the first depiction of Norsemen that the majority of the general public would have seen up until this point, the perception of Viking people and culture had the chance to be heavily influenced. The short clip showing now is from part of a scene where a woman is being accused of cheating and as punishment is having axes thrown at her. This blatantly misogynistic depiction presents the Norsemen as barbarians and, with the laughing and jeering that can be heard from the onlookers, could be misconstrued as a good thing for people who are watching this looking for confirmation of their bigoted beliefs. Historically, what was more likely to have actually happened was for a divorce to be encouraged with property and belongings split equally between the couple. In the following scene, the raiders have just arrived home from Viking to much uproarious cheering. The village leader, Einar, speeds to greet them. His introduction to the movie paints him and his people as literally bloodthirsty. You'll see how.
I drink to your safe return in English ale. I wish that it were English blood.
He literally said he wants to drink blood. And people cheered. Then he wasted the ale he was enjoying just to startle a man who had done nothing to warrant it. This behaviour is uncivilised, and, as being one of the first things shown of the Norsemen, apart from literally plundering and burning down a camp, is used to show them as a more barbaric people.
And so what?
Let's start with Laswell's hypodermic needle theory of communication. Yes, I know, it's super out of date, but at the time it was still accepted and therefore believed. So, it gives an idea of what they could have been thinking at the time. The hypodermic needle theory says that whatever the media said would be injected into the audience's minds and believed as fact. Which means that the idea that Norsemen were as brash, cruel and battle-obsessed as the movie depicted was fully believed to be what the audience was going to interpret and believe. Now, we know that this isn't entirely the case anymore, but according to a similar more widely accepted theory called the Max Macrom's agenda setting theory, it is suggested that the media outlet provides the information, and it is up to the audience to determine how much importance to attach to said information. However, the media is still responsible for telling what the audience should think. Due to the limited previous media about Norsemen and limited resources for personal research for the general public, as the internet would not be widely available for a while yet, information about old Nordic cultures and history were limited for the general public, meaning that there was little reason to interpret the message being expressed of the Norsemen being barbaric and violent as anything other than fact. The original message of the Norsemen being brash and barbaric may have had an effect on how that period of history is taught currently, with there being a few generations between then and now, which has affected how the general public views Vikings. This has then affected how people present Nordic cultures and history in their productions, which are then spread more, continuing the cycle of stereotyping. An extremely popular example of this is Skyrim. In 2011, Bethesda Studios released the 5th installment of their Elder Scrolls series called Skyrim, which has since then been released on basically any platform you can imagine, including the Amazon Echo. This masterpiece of a game is set in the northern region of the main continent called Tamriel, and is based heavily on old Scandinavian cultures, with the people residing there themselves being called Nords, which has to be a play on Norse. So, let's start with them. The Nords of Skyrim are usually characterised as being tough people who have a strong sense of honour that relies heavily on violence. Their main afterlife, Sovngarde, can only be reached by people who have died valiantly in battle or with a sword in their hand, which is similar to the Norse belief of Valhalla. And even in Sovngarde, a duel must be won against a demigod-like figure to get into the mead hall, where all of the memorable and famous historical figures reside. And of course, they just so happen to be ancient warriors. The most famous resident of Sovngarde is a bloke named Isgramor, who is the man that led the methodical and complete genocide of the native species of elves in the area, and he just so happens to be basically worshipped because of it. His army, who were called the Companions, were a group of 500 people who led the original fight against the elves. These companions, through the generations, have stayed growing strong and have been highly respected through the majority of their history, though who they are differs for each NPC you ask. However, there's one thing that has stayed consistent. The companions have been seen as honourable for killing and fighting people or creatures that others pay them to. Have a look at this boat. Yes, I know I'm showing you a building, but that's because the original boat that was used to bring Isgramor and his companions over to Skyrim was used as the roof of the mead hall. What is it with them and their mead? Now, this boat has some very distinctive features, the most notable of which being the shields along the side. This boat was modelled after the longboats often used for Viking by the Norse people, already pulling a strong parallel there. Also, the names and accents of the NPCs, alive and in Sovngarde, are exaggerated Scandinavian accents performed by very not Scandinavian voice actors. The entire thing basically screams, "These people are stereotypical Vikings!" Still don't believe me? Okay, look at this sword. Isn't it cool? Yes. Yes, it is. It also just so happens to be modelled after actual preserved Viking-era swords. See? Sure, the pommels are different shapes, and the crossguard is slightly more curved on the Skyrim sword, but the basic design is pretty much the same. All the designers did was try to make it look more interesting. The length, width, and even materials are the same. And with so many other sword designs in both the game and in real life, it seems like an odd coincidence that an iron sword would be the one carried by most Nords. And then there's the shields. I'm just showing you the iron one for consistency's sake, but basically every shield that can be made by Nords, or has been made by Nords, looks like this. The circular design with a raised bump in the centre, and this is a Viking shield. As before, this is where it cannot be a coincidence that a group called the Nords, from a cold land in the north, with vaguely Scandinavian accents, carrying Viking-style weaponry and shields, with names like Isgramor or Ulfric, just so happen to have these similar traits to the Old Norsemen. And this is where the stereotyping comes in, because these NPCs are depicted as people who are drawn to battle and honour, and want to go into the afterlife where you can spar the greatest fighters from history and drink alcohol for all eternity. And then, my personal pet peeve, they had everything so right. They were doing so well with the weapons and shields and stuff, but they put horns on their helmets. It's not even practical. But, never mind. Let's look at some good representation. For one, the men and women are equal in both the way they are treated and the honour they are regarded for their deeds in battle. There are just as many women soldiers as men soldiers in the Civil War, and it is never treated as strange or talked up like it's a big deal. And when it comes to marriage and romancing characters, there are very few limits that anyone actually cares about, apart from Serena. Male and female NPCs can be romanced at any time, as long as the correct quests are completed first, of course. This representation of the Nords as an accepting people, ignoring the racism against every other species, for women and LGBTQIA+ groups is a great improvement on what The Vikings, the film, not the people, decided to show. This acceptance is also encouraged by the Aesatru High Priest Hilma Orn Hilmerson. Don't know if that's how it's pronounced, I'm sorry if it's not. Who has often spoken up about the Aesatru faith being accepting of everyone. The game treating these things as completely normal is encouraging as it presents the Nords as accepting, which in turn encourages the idea that the real-life Norsemen were as well. This simple detail also allows people of the Aesatru faith and those who are thinking about joining to be more understanding or to be accepted by people who have played the game, which is a lot of people. Overall, the representation of Vikings in media is based heavily on stereotypes, that the spreading of which can be harmful to the Aesatru people and how people see them. Skyrim, with the Nords' obsession with honour and semi-worshipping of a historical figure who committed mass genocide. And The Vikings, with its glorification of mindless violence against foreigners and women, both contributing to the belief that old Norse people were aggressive, misogynistic and racially pure. Giving people with similar beliefs a safe place to congregate under a religion that shares the same pantheon as those supposedly racist people. A way that this can be improved upon is for calmer pieces of media about the Vikings and their pantheon, with perhaps more research done into the regular everyday life. Even talking to those of the Aesatru faith to get a clearer idea of the gods and the worshipping practices. Thank you for watching.
Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are amongst the most used social media platforms, with Facebook having the most users at 2.74 billion a month. Instagram and Twitter have 1.22 billion and 353 million users per month respectively. Social media is an integrated part of life. It is used to keep in contact with family and friends, share images, videos and keep updated with their lives. It is also used for businesses that enable buyers to purchase items and for sellers to do business. Social media has helped businesses develop as advertisements get the word out quicker. According to Statistica, as of October 2020, 4.66 billion connected to the World Wide Web, which is 59% of the world's population. Of those, 4.14 billion use a social media platform, which is approximately 89% of all internet users. As more than half of the world's population are on social media, it would be assumed that the audiences are more empowered. However, this is not easily determined by just the numbers. Many factors come into this, such as activism on social media, cookies, terms and conditions that users agree to, and how social media companies use users' details to provide direct marketing through cookies. The aims of this study are to investigate who is in control of social media. This study will be looking at a variety of factors, such as the impact that Black Lives Matter had on social media and how people learn from it. Additionally, it will look at how users claim to be unaware of what they agree to when it comes to using their data, and if terms and conditions have the needed information available at a glance. The aim is to answer the posed questions: are audiences more empowered now? Theories. Stuart Hall developed the active versus passive audience theory. This theory's idea is that audiences either actively engage with media or accept what the media is telling them. Active audiences are thought to be selective in their media consumption and are able to limit the impact the media has on them, as well as being involved in the media that they consume. Passive audiences are thought to be users who use media without a purpose or reason. They are also thought to be absorbing media without question and have the possibility to be changed psychologically, socially or culturally. This theory relates to empowerment, as social media has both active and passive users, with users using social media for various reasons. Edward Herman and Noam Chomsky created the propaganda model. The theory's basic concept is that mass media is there to communicate messages and symbols to the general population. The functions of mass media are to entertain, amuse, and inform individuals. Its purpose is to install attributes among people, for example, values, beliefs, and behaviours that will help individuals integrate into society. Context. A relative audience theory is cultivation theory, a theory established by George Cabana and Larry Gross in 1976. Typically, this theory applies to advertisements on television. They are repeated throughout the day. The more people who see the same advert, the more people's attitudes and values change. For example, an advert might feature a product and people will want to buy it. Despite the theory being primarily focused on television, this theory can be applied to social media, given that there are many adverts that can be seen multiple times a day. These adverts can have a positive or negative effect depending on the content. When creating a Facebook ad, there is the ability to set keyword targeting, as Facebook automatically shows ads to an audience that will find the ad relevant. There are methods to widen the audience viewers. The methods are core values, custom audiences, and lookalike audiences. Core audiences criteria that includes age, interests, geography, and more. Custom audiences are based on audiences that engage with business online and offline, with the ability to contact them. Lookalike audiences take the interests of customers and match them with potential new customers who have similar interests. Cookies are text files. They are temporary files that relate to users whenever they visit a website. These files can include location, browser, and local language. The purpose of cookies is to ensure that the website reads the files, making it remember user preferences in the future. They tailor the experience on the website to remember users' preferences such as language. The cookies are created to enable the website to read the information at a later date. Examples of these include being able to go on social media or check emails without login. The cookies store the information to remember when the user next visits the social media or email website. An aspect to consider is how social media makes money. Facebook makes money through advertising. Businesses wanting to advertise on Facebook will approach the company and tell them what business they are, what they want to sell, and who their target audience is. Facebook will do the placement for the advertising and make their money via that method. When signed up to Facebook, there are terms of service that are agreed upon, which includes what Facebook does with the user's data. As Facebook does not sell user data and does not give identified information to advertisers unless permitted to do so as per the terms of service. What do they do with it? They provide general information such as user demographic and their interests to advertisers. The purpose of this is to assess their advertisers with understanding their audience, as well as to provide information as to what advertisement led to users making a purchase or action with the advertiser. This gives Facebook empowerment over their audience, as they are providing information for advertisers that leads to users seeing targeted adverts, which potentially leads them to purchase products from the advertiser's website, which increases their revenue and profits. Case study: The Social Dilemma. The Social Dilemma is a documentary about social media. The movie begins by introducing ex-employees from various companies like Apple, Facebook, Google, Twitter, and Instagram. The ex-employees had various roles, such as Senior Vice President of Engineering at Twitter and Director of Monetization at Facebook. The documentary details on the problems going on in the tech industry. Tristan Harris and Justin Rosenstein both suggest, with social media being a free-to-use service, that the users are the products. Justin also states that advertisers pay these social media companies in exchange for the ads being shown to users, with the product being the user. The user's attention is what is being sold to advertisers, with the keyword advertising being a method to get more engagement on Facebook. The advertisers will be able to gain more engagement when users search the keywords, which gives the advertisers more empowerment than the user. As Raskin states that people have a misconception about what Facebook does with user data. What they do is they build a model that predicts users' actions, and the one that wins is whoever has the best model. Jeff Seinberg and Tristan Harris both state that social media companies know what the users are doing at all times. Jeff Seinberg states that companies know every action users are taking on social media. An example being how long a user will stop and look at a photo, making a record of how long a user looks at it for. Tristan Harris states that these companies know when users are lonely and depressed. They will know what users get up to in the evening, and it can highlight a distinct pattern. For example, a user could be on social media for their lunch break, and they could get sent a notification at 12 PM, which will incentivize them to open the application and see what the notification is about. Tristan Harris also reveals that social media companies have three primary goals. The engagement goal, which is to increase users' usage on social media and keep them scrolling. The growth goal, which is to keep users revisiting and gain more friends and have them invite more people. Lastly, there is the advertising goal, which is to make a considerable amount of money from advertising, which is being paired with other goals. The goals are driven by algorithms. The algorithms work out what to show users to increase numbers. An example of this is a user who likes cat photos and will see them on their feed. They could then invite friends that they know likes cats to the page, and then they would invite their friends, which would be a recurring cycle. In the documentary, there is a part where the family is sitting down to dinner and the mother mentions wanting to use all five senses. This is followed by locking all the family's devices into a locked container, which is set to be locked for 1 hour. What precedes this is silence for a moment until the daughter gets up for a fork, but they try to open up the locked container. While the rest of the family have a short-lived conversation, the daughter smashes open the box to gain access to a phone, smashing the son's phone screen in the process. Upon discovery that his phone screen has been smashed, he blames the oldest daughter. The sons argue with his siblings about their usage of phones not being a problem, and that she is frightening their mother out about their phone usage when it is not a problem. The daughter argues back that they do not need their phones while they are eating dinner, and the son retaliates by saying that it's not a big deal. The daughter then says that if it's not a big deal, she challenges him not to use his phone for a week, which is when the mother chimes in. She says if he can put his phone away for a week, she will buy him a new screen for his phone, to which he agrees to the terms. Overall, the social dilemma shows that social media is in control and audiences are not empowered, given that they have three goals: engagement, growth, and advertising. This appears to be an extreme way to portray a family being addictive to using their phones, as the daughter and son cannot be away from their phones for a short time, which shows their addiction to their devices. While the portrayal of this is extreme, it does highlight the issue that there is a form of addiction and that people spend more time on social media than previously thought, with the average being 2 hours and 25 minutes a day. Case study: coronavirus misinformation. In 2020, the global pandemic began with a rapid spread of coronavirus around the world. Along with this came misinformation about the virus. Misinformation varied from hoaxes that the virus was man-made in a lab in China to masks not protecting people from the virus. The misinformation was spread around social media. Throughout the pandemic, public health officials, doctors, and fact-checkers have attempted to suppress these rumours to no avail. When the vaccine rollout began in the United Kingdom, United States of America, and Canada, these rumours have made a comeback and are spreading online again. Overall, with misinformation being shared online with regards to misleading information which is spread by well-intentional, ill-informed people, as aspects to consider is that the governments could be issuing crooked information to shield people from the true extent of the coronavirus impact, or perhaps there is not any trustworthy data presented. However, with users of social media pushing false stories surrounding the pandemic, sites like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube are seeking to remove deceiving content. This shows that social media is empowered, given that social media sites are removing the false information, giving a greater chance for users to see correct information. Case study: Black Lives Matter. Social media can be used to empower the social activist movement. An example of social media activism is the Black Lives Matter movement, which began back in 2013. The movement began in response to the clearing of Trayvon Martin's murderer, George Zimmerman. The movement intentionally began on social media with the hashtag Black Lives Matter, and by 2014 the movement had grown. As Twitter is a social media platform that encourages interaction between users that share the same interests, it can be argued that Twitter could be a social media platform to begin activist movements, which gives audiences on Twitter empowerment and a sense of community. It can also be argued that social media has taken away the sense of community, as time spent online took away time spent offline to interact with others. However, it has been shown that a mixture of in-person and online interaction enhances relationships. While Twitter is used for interacting with users with similar interests, Facebook is primarily aimed towards those who have pre-existing relationships and shared ties. It can still be used to reach a larger audience versus using traditional media. Social media as a whole can be viewed as a stepping stone to engagement with a movement, despite a small percentage engaging in offline action. In 2020, people around the world turned to social media to unite with others, given that seeing each other in person was not permitted. During this time, the Black Lives Matter movement became more prominent on social media platforms due to the murder of George Floyd, the 25th of May 2020. On the 2nd of June 2020, social media sites had the day of Blackout Tuesday to support Black Lives Matter, which followed the death of George Floyd. The point of Blackout Tuesday was to fill Facebook, Twitter and Instagram with black squares, with the aim being to spend the time to become more educated on Black Lives Matter movement. However, with the social media feeds being congested by the images our users were using Black Lives Matter hashtag, it meant that information associated with the worldwide protests were buried. As the Black Lives Matter movement was prominent on social media, it risked being restricted and being a trend that would be forgotten at the accumulation of the news cycle. Despite this, social media does afford a good beginning. It is a place to listen to the voices of black people openly, as well as being somewhere to find relevant resources. However, it can also be considered an echo chamber. When users post stories relating to the Black Lives Matter movement, it is likely that their friends have the same beliefs and values. However, there will be friends or followers that do not have the same beliefs and values will simply ignore the stories being posted and stop looking at them. While it is fine to post stories on social media, it is just as important to discuss face-to-face with family and friends. While the followers and friends that hold the same values and beliefs on social media platforms will appreciate access to more resources, articles and petitions, it is also important to engage with people who do not hold the same beliefs, whether it's family, friends or wider circles. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter and other platforms like it helped spreading the Black Lives Matter message around the world and made more people aware of the issues at hand. With online resources being available to more than half of the world's population, activism has never been easier. Petitions are easier to seek out and sign. Donating money has become more accessible, and there is a large variety of charities to donate to, made simple with it being collated on social media. The effort is ensuring that Black Lives Matter movement is not a trend that is engaged with for a few months. It is to ensure that the movement is continuously engaged with. Overall, both social media and the Black Lives Matter movement were both empowered, given that the Black Lives Matter movement was able to spread their message across social media platforms. As social media allows people to have an equal voice, this meant that the movement was able to get the message across to people around the world, which meant that they were in control of spreading the information. Social media also joined in with the movement as the likes of Facebook, Twitter and Instagram all offered their help and solidarity to the movement. However, social media propelled the movement forward with hashtags, pages and profiles all being available for usage. As social media is a tool that has powerful information can be spread easily to bring people together from around the world, support for Black Lives Matter has grown exceptionally specifically due to social media support and its presence on social media platforms. As Black Lives Matter relies on its messages being spread from around the world, this empowers the communities it is helping support. It helps spread the awareness that is needed for the campaign and brings awareness to the injustice against the communities. Conclusion. Overall, people have a fundamental need to belong and a fundamental desire for social status. Social networking sites grab people because they involve personal information and bear on our social status and reputation. However, it has been shown that the consumer do in fact have some control, but there is any benefit from social networking without people being consumed by them. Social media uses tools with limited potential. If consumers continue to use these sites, they will end up suffocating in a self-contained bubble of make-believe and lives. However, if they filter out the right and wrong, their experience will be much better. While there is not a correct way to use social media, it depends on the user's intentions and what they will get out of it. There are endless ways to utilize social media, and every user is given the same rights to post a status and choose whom to follow and what to believe. It has been proven that these platforms can be a great way to express people's voices, like with the Black Lives Matter movement, but they can have a negative impact on things like fake news. However, they are trying to limit and delete any harmful and fake news. All the consumers can do when reading a post, check to make sure the information is correct. It is up to them to believe it or not. However, a solution could be to have users cross-reference a post to see if it is fact or false. After the research, it is believed that social media platforms do control the advertising aspect, but they match what the user searches and the consumers have the rights to free speech and what they can see. Thanks for listening.
Since they began in the 1970s, video games have grown into a massive, profitable and influential industry. This means it has become more important for the industry to widen its audience to people outside their normal demographics. One of the best ways to do this is to improve playability. Playability is how easy it is to understand and play a game, encompassing the control button use, aesthetics, user interface, game mechanics, level design and tutorials. Developers spend a great deal of money and time on this issue. However, there appears to be an issue when designing a game for inexperienced players. This often comes about as a result of game designers being so immersed in the subject, they often fail to consider amateur players who are not familiar with the conventions of video games. As a result, a lot of games fail to explain basic yet essential features to players, which can often ruin the experience for them. In this presentation, we will be looking at the factors that make up playability, discuss the mistakes game designers make, and suggest how playability might be improved. Aims of study. The purpose of this study is to see if there are issues with the playability of PC and console games, which might deter particular novice users from playing games. The current study is in two parts. Part 1, a quantitative research examining gaming experience. Part 2, a qualitative research examining the experience of novice gamers. Literacy review. This section will be divided into several questions. What does playability consist of? How do aesthetics and UI affect playability? What makes a good tutorial? How much basic knowledge does someone require to play a game? What does playability consist of? Playability is an aspect of gameplay, which is how easy it is for a user to understand and perform the tasks needed to play the game. The game in turn is part of the user experience. How do aesthetics and UI affect playability? This question is the main subject of a paper written by James D. and Wills J. called Effective User Interface Design in Games, which takes the general principles for creating a good user interface for video games and sees how and if these factors affect the video game experience. Throughout the paper, they argue that the primary purpose of a user interface, or UI, in video games is to help create a feeling of flow within the player, which is a euphoric state of engagement. This is achieved by following the rules of good UI design. These are visibility of system status, match between system and the real world, user control and freedom, consistency and standards, error prevention, recognition rather than recall, flexibility and efficiency of use, aesthetics and minimalist design, help user recognize, diagnose and recover from error, help and documentation. However, many video games fail to follow these guidelines. This is often because video game menus tend to favor aesthetics over function, with menus that are hard to read and hard to navigate, like having the text being in a font that is hard to read. These problems can be made worse if the player has to sit through animations and load screens that eat up valuable time. This results in a negative player experience which prevents flow from taking place. This shows that good UI design is a central aspect of gameplay. It allows the game to communicate important information effectively to the player on how to play the game. Another important aspect of this subject is human-computer interaction, or HIC, a field of study focused on human interaction with computers. It integrates concepts and methods from computer science, design, and psychology to build interfaces that are accessible, easy to use, and efficient. The term was first used in the Keystone Level module for user performance time with interface systems by Card Stewart K, Thomas P. Morgan, and Alan Newell. The ultimate goal of HIC is to design a computer that is fit for purpose. Activity theory is based upon the works of Levi Gutsky and is considered to be a good way of conceptualizing these design concerns. The theory is made up of 4 components: the subject, the person using the computer, in the case of video games it is the player, the artifact. This is the physical object that makes the interaction possible, like a PC or console. The objective, the purpose of the interaction, like trying to deliver a worthwhile experience to the player. The motive, the reason behind the subject's choices, like a video game strategy. These rules can be combined with The ideas from Video Game Values Play as Computer Interaction by Pippa Burr, which talks about the concept of video game values, which are the styles of play that video games tend to encourage, depending on the experience they are trying to deliver. For example, a beaten up would encourage an aggressive and fast style of gameplay, while a stealth game would encourage the players to act slowly and think carefully. How does controller design affect gameplay? Since all console games require a game controller to work, creating a good design for one is very important. In the book Level Up, The Guide to Great Video Game Design by Scott Rogers, the author discusses ergonomics, which is the discipline of creating tools fit for human hands. This means that the structure of human hands needs to be taken account when making a controller. For example, certain fingers are more useful than others, the thumb being the most useful because of its good reach and flexibility, while the pinky finger is the least useful because it lacks flexibility and reach. They also talk about other factors like considering the target audience's age. For example, a controller for a younger audience should have a simpler layout because it's easier to learn. What makes a good tutorial? One of the most common tools used to teach players are tutorials. These are sequences of gameplay meant to highlight and explain specific mechanics, like explaining how to jump in a platformer or the function of a building in a strategy game. In their video, Tutorials 101, How to Design a Good Game Tutorial, Extra Credits, a web series created by a team of professionals in the gaming industry, explain general rules that most tutorials should follow. These rules are: use as little text as possible. Text tends to damage pacing and immersion, and as a result, most players will skip it. It is better to have the player play through the actions they need to learn, which is both more engaging and guarantees that the player understood what was being explained to them. Don't front load. Since a player can only absorb so much information at once, a game shouldn't go through all the necessary information at once. Instead, the information should be given to the player at a steady pace as it becomes crucial to their immediate situation. This makes the information easier to learn and speeds up the rate of gameplay. The tutorial should be fun. Since people learn better when they are engaged, the tutorial should be as engaging as the rest of the game. This will not only help the player learn, but since most games have some tutorial at the start, an interesting one can give a player a good first impression. Listen to the player during testing. A common mistake that developers make when creating a tutorial is due to the fact they are so immersed in the game, they don't realize what is evident to them isn't going to be obvious to a player. The best way to uncover this is to listen to player testers, as the lack of the formality with the systems means they will be ignorant enough to need to learn, thus drawing attention to information that needs explaining. Be mindful of your target audience. Different audiences will have different needs, so tutorials need to be designed around those needs. For example, a game made for young children will need to have a way of communicating information to someone who can't read. They also suggest a few extra tips, like being able to skip the tutorial. This makes the experience less stressful for returning players. They also suggest that there should be a way to revisit information later in-game, like an in-game encyclopedia. How much basic knowledge does someone need to play a game? This question is addressed in a YouTube series called What Games Are Like for Someone Who Doesn't Play Games by Ratsburn. The author selected a virgin gamer and observed their attempts to play some video games to see how playable each game was. Throughout the experiment, the author reached the following conclusions. Many conventions that seem obvious to experienced players and game developers aren't to a novice player. They often struggle to perform the most basic gaming tasks. For example, while playing the PC game Portal, the subject never realized she could control the camera and look around the environment. This is because the tutorial never explained this basic function to the player, despite the importance of maintaining the flow of play. The author speculated that since using the mouse to look around is so common in PC games, developers assumed that all players would already know to use the mouse this way, and didn't consider the perspective of a novice gamer who isn't familiar with the convention. Survey. In order to further test these theories, a survey and experiment were conducted. In the survey, different players were asked a number of questions about their experience and thoughts on games. There were 23 participants, 13 male, 10 female, age range between 18 and 64. The survey asked the following questions. How often do you play video games? What is your age? Have you ever struggled to understand how to play any games? Have you ever struggled to use the game controls? Have you ever found a video game UI to be confusing? Do you pay attention to a game during the tutorial? Have you ever given up on a game because it was too hard? Do you think automatic pop-up hints would be useful? Could the video game experience be improved? The most noticeable observations that could be drawn from the results are: the vast majority of subjects agreed that pop-up hints would be helpful when learning how to play, as they could quickly give the player important information when they are confused or lost. One respondent who played games frequently said, "If there isn't a tutorial or no one to assist me, some games are just frustrating to me." Another said, "If game instructions were unclear, I just can't be bothered with it." The second observation was, 5 of the subjects had no gaming experience and were not intending to play them. These were in the 55 to 64 age group. They mostly commented that they neither had the time nor the inclination to play. Experiment. Each subject was asked to play 3 video games from different genres. Each subject was invited to produce relatively unstructured feedback on the games. The only structured questions were about how easy it was to learn the controls and mechanics of the game. The games were selected based upon the following: playability, must be able to run on all computers and devices. Reasonable instructions on how to play must be available. Games were good impression. The basic idea of good impression is that you need to clean up your apartment before your mother gets home within a set time period. Infinite Mario. In this game, the player needs to get to the other side of the level by jumping over pit hazards and enemies. Kingdom Rush, a tower defense game. There were 6 participants in total. Results: Infinite Mario. A subject who was familiar with other Mario games was able to quickly understand how to play. However, a subject who was unfamiliar with Mario games was confused about whether or not certain characters were enemies or not. Another was confused when the game started up, and instead of starting on a level, it started at the level selection screen, which did not match their expectation and caused them to become stuck and unable to progress. Several participants did not understand the functions of bricks and coins. Good impression. The most common observation was that players would often struggle to understand how to perform the tasks that would get a good score. One participant struggled to pick up objects because the instructions had not explained that in order to pick up an object, the character needed to be facing the object first. Another participant assumed that a chicken needed to be stored in the oven. However, it was just a background detail that couldn't be interacted with. Many participants felt that they would get better if they played the game more. Kingdom Rush. This game had the most diverse opinions about it. One subject reported that they did not understand why selling and upgrading towers could be helpful. Another said They were clueless about the game as the instructions were rubbish, but they got a hand of it over time. Many participants enjoyed the game but found it frustrating to play as they did not understand exactly how to play it. Discussion. Part 1. Examining the attitudes towards video games from a variety of experiences and age groups. It was noted that 30% of the participants did not play video games. 85% of the participants said that the user experience of playing video games could be improved. About a third of the subjects struggled to understand how to play video games. 65% did use user instructions, and over 80% said that hints on how to play the game would be useful. These findings suggest that instructions on how to play video games are important. Over 40% of subjects had difficulties with game controls, which is significant and appears to support previous research. Usable game controls are an important part in the user experience. 43% had given up on video games because it was too hard. The findings of this study suggest that there are problems with playability in video games. Previous issues identified in the research are supported by this study. It appears that the user experience could be improved. Two factors identified in the current study which might be contributing to the playability were requirements for player instructions to support the gaming experience and more usable controls. Part 2 focused on 6 subjects. The subjects were novice gamers who were asked to play some simple games and comment on their experience. All subjects found the games challenging to play. The main issue was poor instructions on how to play the game rather than an inability to use controls. In the current study, games that require simple keyboard strokes and game controllers were not examined. All subjects found that they learned more from playing the games rather than instructions provided. Many subjects found the games frustrating due to a lack of instructions. This might have caused them to stop playing, whilst others found that as they improved, they became more keen to play. This was a small sample size, and a larger sample may have yielded different results. Similarly, the games selected may not be typical of all basic video games. In conclusion, playability is one of the most important factors in determining whether or not someone would play a game, and if they would keep doing so. This study identified problems like poor instructions and inability to use controls. Subjects often learnt as they played. Seems to support the idea that some people try to play video games but find the experience too difficult and stop playing and feel less motivated to try others. There is also a huge skill gap problem involved. This means that regular gamers seek more challenging games. The problem with that is that newer gamers will not attempt to play difficult games. Another barrier to the hobby is the hardware, which is expensive for a lot of people. While it is impossible to make video games that cater to everyone, PC and console games need to consider the needs of inexperienced players. Improving playability with better instructions and ease of use would appear to be the key elements. Further research is needed to identify the requirements of different target markets. In particular, there should be a space for less complex PC/console games for novice gamers who do not wish to progress further up the skill ladder. There may also be a need for society at large to begin educating people at a young age about video games due to their increasing influence in society. Thank you for watching. May you have a nice day.